Developers build the future. We take ideas and make them real. My job is to think, create, and solve for a living.
Each step we take is possible because someone asked questions. Why do we have to do it this way? What if we did it that way?
Each step I take enables people to go further.
Be creative. Change something. I'm working on blockchain that will change asset identity.
Artificial intelligence to automate homes.
Autonomous robots to improve efficiency.
My app is advancing human rights.
I build things to help connect people. Not everyone gets to build their passion. We share what we know. We share what we do.
We try, learn, try again.
Make, break, build.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Amit Zavery.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you guys are having a good open world and code one. We have an exciting keynote plan today. Going to spend next couple of hours talking about how to build the next generation cloud applications. We have been, of course, working with many developers, and we have a lot of developers at Oracle as well. And we're seeing a huge amount of change in terms of how you build applications. There's a lot of new trends, specifically people moving from monolithic applications to microservices and serverless. There's a lot of architectural changes associated with that as well. Also evolution from DevOps to NoOps as well. So kind of having a whole operational process embedded with the engineering team. And that's a lot of change for most of the developers today. How do you run and build your applications on a daily basis is a very, very different mindset required. Open source is becoming quite pervasive in many of the architectures as well. A lot of the services have been built with open source and management around that. Next generation UX paradigms is coming up as well. A lot of digital assistant, chatbot as the next generation application interface. A lot of the users want to interact using common interfaces like Facebook Messenger or WeChat or WhatsApp or Slack instead of having to do things through a web app or through a mobile application. So that is becoming a very important part of the application development requirement. More and more we see distributed transactions as well as distributed ledger kind of things required through blockchain. So blockchain as the kind of the building block for next generation application for data management as well as distributed transaction requires also new learnings in terms of how you build applications using that. And then AI ML. Everybody talks about AI ML. It has to be pervasive. It has to be part of your basic platform. So once you build an application, you want to make AI ML as part of your whole DevOps process, CI/CD pipeline. So those needs also needs to be addressed as part of your app dev work you do on a daily basis. So to make this possible, at Oracle, of course, we've been working aggressively to really build and provide a comprehensive portfolio of integrated and open PaaS services. Be able to allow you to develop and deploy all those applications easily, integrate and extend them, publish content and engage users when you build all these applications, analyze data, and then predict actions associated with that, and then secure and manage those services and environments you might be running in. So the cloud platform from Oracle, I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. We have 30+ services available today for you to use. Has things around data management, of course, services around application integration, data integration, analytics and big data, things around application development we talked about in terms of the areas you need for building the new generation applications, identity and security, content and experience, and system management. We do a lot of work to make sure it remains open. I will talk about some of the things we're doing to really support a lot of the open technologies and open standards out there. Make it all integrated, so once you start with one service, you don't have to learn different architectures, different security model, different development tools, as well as allow you to run all these services and your workloads in a hybrid manner. So you can, of course, run this thing on Oracle Public Cloud, but you also can deploy this behind the customer's firewall or your partner data center, so that if you have any regulatory issues, any compliance requirements, you at least have ability to have flexibility of deployment. And then we make sure that AI and ML is embedded in our platform as well. And it's all running on top of Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for giving you high performance and scalability and security. So beyond the core services, we again have been investing aggressively to innovate in our platform. So we have core services around AI and data science. We recently acquired a company called datascience.com to provide data scientists the ability to do model management and the life cycle of models when you want to use different frameworks as well as different tools on top of that. Blockchain as a core service using Hyperledger Fabric and providing you a set of APIs as well as a managed service around blockchain so you can build your applications without having to learn the nitty-gritty of blockchain itself. Digital assistant, so to be able to really build the next generation user experience. And again, using a lot of AI ML to understand the user intent and how we provide that information back to the user based on what they need to find out or what they need or be able to transact on it. And then VR and AR tools, so embed that into your applications as well. So if you look at what we're doing from the open perspective, we do provide you a choice of technologies to use from in a platform. You can use different programming languages. You can use different databases. You can use different tools and different frameworks. So again, not just Oracle offerings, but other third-party and open-source technologies out there. We also provide cloud services using other open-source technologies. In application development, for example, we provide Docker as a service. We provide Kubernetes as a service. We, of course, support Eclipse as the dev tool. We have Hadoop and Spark available as a service as well, and Kafka. So all of these things are all based on open source technologies without having any forking around it, so we don't land up changing any of this stuff. We use the core services, core open source technology and build services around it. So if you want to move that workload anywhere else and you want to deploy it on your own environment, you can easily do that as well without having to rewrite any of that stuff. AI, ML, and blockchain, again, a lot of open source technology used there as well. And then we support a lot of third-party technologies, not just open source, but standards out there, other applications. So we integrate with like Salesforce.com, Microsoft, SAP, different security standards as well. So again, you can have ability to use different technologies in your environment as well. And then work with a lot of different channels. So if you look at talking about digital assistant, for example, we work with Alexa, we work with Siri, we work with Slack, Facebook Messenger. So again, we support multiple channels for you to interface with it. And then we are also contributing a lot back to the open source community. No doubt, we've been doing a lot of work with the Java community for years. But other areas like Hadoop and Spark, we have contributors at Oracle who participate and contribute into that environment. So to show you what we're doing also with CNCF, I'm going to invite D. Kumar, Vice President of Marketing Developer Relations for Cloud Native Computing Foundation, to talk about the work they are doing and how Oracle is collaborating with them. So welcome, D. How are you doing?
Good evening. I'm thrilled to welcome you to Day 2 of Oracle Code One 2018 in beautiful San Francisco. First, I'd like to thank Oracle for becoming a platinum member since day 1 of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. So when you do a Google search on digital transformation, you will end up with approximately 300 million search results. Yet, I'm unable to find a good definition for digital transformation. But based on industry trends and what we are hearing, there are 4 major phenomena that are driving this change: economic ecosystems, democratization, collaboration, and acceleration. So what does digital transformation really depend on? It depends on cloud-native computing, which then depends upon making cloud-native technologies universal and sustainable, which then depends upon harnessing the power of open source. So let's talk about democratization. Why do companies open source projects? Using Kubernetes as an example, which is the leading container orchestration platform, was a Google-led project. Industry leaders like Craig McLuckie and others came together to solve some major problems in the industry. One, how do we accelerate cloud-native computing, whether it's DevOps, microservices, containers, orchestration. 2, how do we create a portability layer for the cloud? And 3, how do we achieve digital transformation? Where do we begin? These industry leaders are really important in terms of driving a broader perspective to represent the views of developers, IT practitioners, real-world customer use cases, end-user application use scenarios. And in order to drive this big impact across the industry, Google donated Kubernetes to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation in 2015. And that's when the CNCF was formed. Today, we have 300+ members, and we are growing. We are the home to 25+ cloud native projects. Kubernetes adoption continues to move to the right. So I pulled out some recent stats for you all. Kubernetes has over 100,000 commits, 25,000 developers, 85,000 pull requests. Compared to the 1.5 million open source projects on GitHub, Kubernetes is number 9 for commits, number 2 for authors or issues, second only to Linux. Kubernetes is the first CNCF project to graduate this year. Now let's talk about collaboration. How do companies maintain control when these projects are community-driven? So first, let's look at what's our community like. Developers, contributors, maintainers, product leaders, community leaders, they are the heart and soul of the cloud-native ecosystem. And this community, they take pride in a culture that demonstrates core values. Sarah Novotny, who's the head of open source strategy at Google, she says, let's see folks take more pride in chopping wood and carrying water. It's the hard work from this community that's led to the rise of Kubernetes at a massive scale. Established global companies like Lyft, Uber, Twitter, Bloomberg, Goldman Sachs, and many others are using Kubernetes in production at a massive scale. According to Red Monk, 71% of Fortune 100 companies are now using containers, and more than 50% of Fortune 100 companies are using Kubernetes as the container orchestration platform. And a little more about the community. This community is very passion-driven, and they work towards happy, healthy projects. And what does that lead to? It leads to ubiquity, which in turn leads to meeting the needs of our customers. I often get asked, what is the open culture, is the open source community a standards body? Sarah Novotny put this into perspective for me. So in the 1990s, the standards body first created a spec, and then it was followed by implementation, and then it led to becoming a standard. The open source community approach is more like better. It's code first. So you start with code, which is the reference implementation, which is then followed by the spec, and then conformance, which is the standards eventually. The results from the open source community has led to a rich end-user community. And when I say end users, these are amazing brands, companies that are using cloud-native projects, but internally, and they don't commercialize products or services. As you can see here, there are some amazing brands. And what these companies do is they try out cloud-native technologies to either to optimize certain internal processes or some of the applications that are serving millions of users. And they're also contributing back to the CNCF hosted projects in many ways. Now that I've talked about the good stuff, I think it's really important for us to look at some of the open source projects that have failed. And it's important to use the learnings for the future. A few years ago, Cluster HQ shut down after receiving $18 million in VC funding. The blog post from the CEO read, "We are cluster bomb." So what happened? What went wrong? Cluster HQ customers were not wrong. There is a need for the infrastructure to support stateful applications. The problem was Flocker, which is the open source technology from Cluster HQ, connected to the wrong storage. And what I mean by that is legacy storage systems are siloed, not cloud native, and require manual provisioning. And these legacy storage systems are designed to provide storage for servers and not applications running in containers. So though Cluster HQ set the path for the industry and a first step, it was definitely not the last step, and they also came into the market way too early. Today, the storage array system architectures have evolved, and there are many methods to support stateful containers. So it's important to understand what is crossing the chasm. I'm sure most of you have read the book by Jeffrey Moore, which defined the 5 segments for technology consumers. So innovators are techies who live on the bleeding edge, and they work very hard to make new projects or technologies to work. Early adopters, they match the new projects or technologies with a strategic opportunity. And then they drive this through organizations, and in fact, they also take a high risk with using these technologies against business-critical applications. The early majority are the pragmatists, and they are just looking to improve productivity in existing operations. Hence lies the chasm. So the first 2 segments want to change and disrupt, and the latter are looking for continuity. So not coincidentally, the projects inside the Cloud Native Computing Foundation have 3 different stages: sandbox, incubation, and graduation, which map to the 5 segments of technology consumers. So the way you want to think about CNCF is we are an organization that will help take the open source projects to cross the chasm and go mainstream. Kubernetes and Prometheus are the 2 projects that graduated from CNCF this year. But crossing the chasm is not the end. It's just the beginning of mainstream market adoption. 1/3 of the end users, they want something that just works, that doesn't require a ton of time or deep expertise. So for instance, a managed Kubernetes service could help with setup and ease the operational complexity. And of course, as tech becomes more reliable and predictable, that allows for the next wave of new sandbox projects and innovation. So now moving on to economic ecosystems, where I'm going to talk about profits. I'd like to thank all the members. Again, there are some amazing companies here. They are the platinum and gold members for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And these companies have invested in, they believe in, and they continue to invest and support open source technologies. thereby resulting in flourishing ecosystems. And the excitement, of course, is seen through our CNCF landscape. And it's becoming a challenge for us to accommodate all the growing logos. And as you can see, the logos are getting smaller and smaller. Kubernetes has grown and developed to become the economic powerhouse for cloud native. And what that means is a lot of other open source projects are getting built around the Kubernetes, which then allows for companies of all sizes to create products and services. So these three gears that you see here are fundamental to what we call the open source innovation engine. So it's the open source projects, and then you have products and services, and then profits. So our jobs collectively here is to get the three gears spinning faster. And our job at CNCF is to host good open source projects, which then companies in which all of you participate can use so you can create and build new products and services and commercialize these products and services, thereby creating value, which in turn results in profits. And then what you do is you take the profits back and reinvest it into open source technologies. And what that means is you can hire more engineers, which means more code, more improvements, which means better products and services. So this becomes a virtuous cycle of investment, innovation, and economic activity. Oracle believes in, has invested in, and continues to invest in open source technologies. OpenJDK, MySQL, Java, Linux, PHP, Eclipse, and many others. So this requires a lot of investment from companies like Oracle and others to support open source technologies. Oracle is committed to CNCF technologies. Oracle is committed to Kubernetes in particular. And Oracle is also looking to leverage other CNCF projects like Prometheus, Envoy, gRPC, and OpenTracing. And here is a quote that I love from Bob Quillen, who is the VP of Developer Relations at Oracle. Oracle's commitment involves engineers and contributions, earning your stripes or to do the work by chopping wood and carrying water. So the journey to cloud native can be pretty daunting. I always get asked, where do we get started? How do we begin? So in order to simplify this, we created a tool which is called the Cloud Native Trail Map, which essentially simplifies, and it's put together a well-traveled path that's tested and trusted. And of course, there are numerous paths a company can take very specific to your situation. So the Cloud Native Trail Map is available at cncf.io Trail Map, or you can scan the QR code here. And the first thing I want to do is the Cloud Native Trail Map has 10 steps. So I'm going to go through the 10 steps. And like I said earlier, this is a well-traveled path when we've talked to a lot of customers, end users, as well as the community. And based on their feedback, this is more like a recommended approach or a guideline. So step 1, containerization. You can't do cloud native unless you containerize an application. Any size application will do. Even if it's a PDP-11 code that's running on an emulator, that can be containerized. Step 2 is CI/CD. So set up continuous integration, continuous delivery, so that the changes that you make to your source code automatically results in new containers built, tested, and deployed across various environments, whether it's staging, QA, to production. Then set up automated rollouts, rollbacks, and tests. CNCF, we don't offer a CI/CD pipeline, CI/CD solution just yet, but there are many options out there. Jenkins, GitLab CI, and Spinnaker. The third step is to pick an orchestration solution. Kubernetes is the market leader, and there is a certified version that's available. And there are other orchestration solutions to consider: Mesos, Pouch, Nomad, and Docker Swarm. Step 4, observability, is table stakes for cloud native at scale. So you want to pick solutions for monitoring, logging, and open tracing. So things to consider here are Prometheus for monitoring, Fluentd for logging, and if you're thinking about tracing, you could consider using an open tracing compliant implementation like Jaeger. Step 5 is service mesh. So service mesh, as you all know, is about service discovery. It connects services together, and it monitors ingress from the internet. And some solutions to consider here are Envoy, Linkerd, and CoreDNS. Networking, if you want to enable a more flexible networking layer that sits on top of your infra, there are a couple solutions here which are CNI compliant, and projects like Calico, Flannel, or VBNet. Distributed database, again, if you're looking here for more resiliency and scalability, you will not get this with a single database system. Vitis is a distributed database system, and it's pretty good for running MySQL at scale through sharding. Step 8, messaging. So if you need higher performance than JSON REST, consider using gRPC. NATS is an open source messaging publishing type system, and it supports cloud native applications, IoT messaging, and microservices-oriented architectures. Step 9 is container runtime. You can use alternative container runtimes, and most solutions that are out there in the industry are OCI compliant. And the solutions to consider here are Containerd, CRIO, and Rocket. Alibaba has an OCI compliant container runtime solution as well called Pouch Container. And the last step is software distribution. So if you're looking to do a secure software distribution at scale, evaluate Notary, which is an implementation of the update framework, which is tough. And TUF is designed to be a part of a larger secure software distribution framework. And it's secure because it incorporates a variety of cryptographic keys, which is used for content signing and verification. TUF is already used in production by Docker, Leap, App Container, ATP Solutions, and VMware. Harbor is another open source project from VMware, but now it's a part of CNCF, and this is a secure container registry. So now moving on to acceleration. So at CNCF, we conduct 2 surveys each year. And based on the biannual survey results, where we go and poll 5,000 people that work across global 5,000 companies, and the survey results reveal use of cloud-native technologies in production has grown over 200% when compared to 2017. And the top reasons cited based on the survey is faster deployment time, cloud portability, and improved scalability. So I'd like to talk a little bit about developer success stories. And developer success stories are essentially stories that we hear from our end users because they are the first to adopt cloud-native technologies and apply it within their companies. So here's a story from Pinterest. Most of you all have heard Pinterest. After 8 years in existence, Pinterest has over 1,000 microservices. So they had this roadmap to launch a new compute platform, and they wanted to get to production very quickly, from idea to production all the way, and they didn't want to interrupt the existing operations. So what they started doing is the first phase is to move all the 1,000 microservices into containers. And then they started moving the containers into production. And once that was done, in 2017, they started to look for orchestration solutions. And they picked Kubernetes. So we work very closely with the developers as well as the IT practitioners, not just limited to Pinterest, but across our end user ecosystem. And what they shared with us is, with the new compute platform, they saw 80% decrease in capacity during non-peak hours, and the Jenkins Kubernetes cluster saw a decrease in 30% with instant hours per day when compared to the old static cluster that they had. So I want to end the keynote, and this is just not limited to Java developers, but I want to share with everyone that now that we have talked about the benefits of open source and how open source is going to be a big part of the future of digital transformation, I think the journey is to look at container as a deployment artifact. So regardless of the ways you're creating and building applications, once you put it inside a container, that creates agility, and it's also the portability concept becomes really, really useful. And second, like I've shared with you, it's just not Kubernetes. Once you embrace the orchestration solution, there are a lot of other projects that can be valuable as you get on this journey with cloud native. The other thing I'd like to do is to invite all of you to participate with the CNCF Technical Oversight Committee. So this is a committee that has been put together where industry leaders, visionaries, they're constantly working to figure out the next generation of cloud-native applications. And the TOC is headed by Alexis Richardson, and his role, and he's very passionate about making sure that the journey to cloud native is easy, and also using the whole tooling chain with all the projects around Kubernetes. And here is a great quote from Arun Gupta, who's a Java champion, and he says, "Developer ecosystems grow and thrive in a vibrant open source community, resulting in economic ecosystems." Thank you.
Thank you, Dee.
Thanks, Amit.
Great information. You can have that, too.
Oh.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. So as you heard from Dee, I think there's a lot of exciting things going on with CNCF. And at Oracle, we, of course, are a very active participant with that group as well. In general, as I said, Oracle Cloud Native Framework, which we've been building as part of our offerings, is open. We continue to make sure that we use unforked, supported open source offerings out there, so that you can easily make those things portable and use it anywhere you choose to. A lot of projects, like Dee was mentioning, we're participating with many of those projects and also adopting it into our platform. We also do a lot of active community participation beyond CNCF. We are participating with OpenJDK. We have a lot of work going on there in terms of contribution with KuberCon. So in general, there are a lot of other places we want to make sure we provide a lot of contribution and collaboration as well. And then we, of course, continue to innovate in open source. We definitely do things with Java, but we have a lot of new offerings like Graal VM, which is available today now for you to use, GraphPipe for AI, and then Linux, of course, which we've been delivering for many years as well. And then in general, I think the framework we have built is enterprise grade, and that's the big area of investment we make, is to really guarantee low latency, better CPU and I/O performance, and make sure it's highly available with availability domains and zones as well. Running on bare metal, you're getting a lot of good performance. We also work with NVIDIA on the GPU side, so that we can give you performance when you're doing AI projects, and can really accelerate the performance on that side as well. And then automated operations and lifecycle. So a lot of these projects we work on, the lot of work we do is to really make sure the systems are automated, the lifecycle management and the processes are built in. So as a developer, you don't have to deal with any of the lifecycle complexity. And then, of course, we're using a lot of standardized Kubernetes to do the orchestration associated with the lifecycle as well. So with that, I wanted to invite Matt Thompson from our product team to show you some of the projects we're working on, give you some demos, and walk you through some of the work we've been doing in this area. Thank you. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Hello. No, come on. I know it's the afternoon. Hello. There we go, OK. So we're going to go quick here. So my name is Matt Thompson. I actually joined Oracle only about 90 days ago. Before I was here, I worked for another company in the cloud space. They have a small engineering center up in Washington. We won't have to talk about them. But it actually feels like coming home a little bit, because I actually spent 15 years at Sun before I journeyed to that other company. And there we go. So one of the reasons why I came to Oracle was because, to me, I'm a cloud guy. This is what I've been doing for the last decade. It was actually the last thing I was doing at Sun as well. And one of the things that really excited me was the opportunity to just sling code and get it deployed quickly. So I have a quick question, and then we're going to jump into the demo. And this kind of dates myself, but how many of you remember a time when deployment either took a lunch or like an entire night? OK. Yeah, don't say that. I knew somebody was going to say that. Please, I hope it doesn't. I hope it still doesn't, because that's not the goal here. So that was one of the promises that the cloud had. And when I started looking around at what I wanted to do next, I wanted to come to a platform that I thought was open, super secure, and allowed for developers to be really productive. And in short, that's why I'm here. And so what we're going to do in this demo is try to show you some of that live. So what I'd like to do is invite Matt Baldwin and Manish Kapoor on stage. Come on up, guys. No. These are the guys. Come on. How many of you guys have done demos on stage before live? They need a larger round of applause, right? Come on. Thank you. OK. Guys, take us away.
OK. Well, thank you, everyone, and it's great to be here. Thanks, Matt. And so can we switch over there? Yep. So
you're good.
I'm good. Awesome. Thank you. So go ahead.
Okay, so what we're going to show here is we're going to take you through a pretty simple demo conceptually on the art of selling and buying a car. But we're going to use some of the cool cloud technologies that we've talked about to kind of do that. And so we're going to keep this going. Matt, go ahead.
Well, thanks a lot. We're going to go through and buy and sell a car, actually sell and buy a car. And so the first thing we want to do is hopefully move. There we go. And there we go. We're going to sell a car with chatbots, serverless, and blockchain. And we're going to have a little cartoon here. First is that what we're trying to do is increase the level of engagement with our customers, and so that we can actually sell a car. In this case, it's a very expensive car, about $385,000. And we're going to set up a chatbot to actually do that. Even some of you may actually know and recognize this car. So I'm going to create a chatbot to engage with car sellers and buyers. And in that chatbot, I'm going to it will then be processed through a series of functions. And those serverless functions are then going to process it and then place it into the blockchain so that other customers can actually look them up and then actually buy that car and transfer that car from one ledger to another ledger using blockchain. So here's kind of the notional architecture. First, we have customer one. They're going to sell the car, and we're going to do it via a chat mechanism. And that chat mechanism is going to leverage some technology, some automated, automatic license reading software. And then we're going to process that through an event kind of mechanism. And then from functions, we'll then place that actual car and the VIN number and all that back directly onto the blockchain. And then we'll have this car, it drives over, it then goes into the blockchain, and then comes across. So first, let's talk about the rise of the digital assistant quickly. And so the first thing we see, and we see with our customers, is the notion when we're trying to increase overall engagement, is that we're building and we're seeing the demand for conversational interfaces. Conversational interfaces, like when you're buying a car and saying, I want to buy a car, I want to sell a car, but it may come in different ways, in different processing. And so we see these conversational interfaces through anything from Facebook Messenger, through chat, through a variety of interfaces. And so this is also ties into the overall mobile first. But it has some challenges associated to it. Because there's many interfaces. It could be Alexa, it could be Siri, chat, web, text, voice, and other types of devices. And we need to look at some of the implementation complexity. For example, what about security? Back-end integration. How do I get back to that system of record that I actually might need to actually surface up information from my chatbot? And then getting the AI right, where it requires many technical components such as NLP, natural language processing, machine learning, speech, and image processing, plus dialogue and context. So to get right to it, let's actually kind of walk into what this looks like. So I'm going to go to my phone here. And so...
Yeah, it's switched to phone.
Awesome, thank you. So hi. And so this is all live and good stuff, and hopefully it all works. It will. So hi. And so what we're going to do is say, hi, we're going to sell a car in this case. We're going to sell the car. OK, so now we need a license plate. So I'm going to go here, and I have the car right here. So it's 6LIC274. And then we'll send it up. And this is just using straight up Facebook Messenger, common tool that's used. And then, I want to have a car. This is a special car for Oracle, right? So it's called a Lexus LFA. And
whose car are you selling, Matt?
Larry's car.
Yeah, I might be selling
Larry's car. Okay.
Okay, Matt, would you like this car? I'm just wondering. So we can look at the details on this car, right? Here's some more details, and we're kind of walking through it and say, is this correct? Yes. And what's the mileage? It's not a high mileage car. It's 1,100. And then we'll go. And great. So now we're kind of having the offer, and we're actually having the offer between us, and we're working back and forth. Yeah, that's great. So now we've actually placed the car onto the blockchain. But let's look at what this digital assistant's actually doing. And so let's transfer over back to the other screen. Because one fun thing we have a lot of demos here, and make sure we're logged in. Always got to check for that. In this case, we're leveraging a chatbot, and you can see on the left-hand side here, different intents. And if you think what the chatbots are actually doing, it's a big state machine, and a state machine which is influenced by the intents, and then what are the utterances associated to that intent. So for example, I might want to buy a car, I have a greeting, hello Matthew, I want to sell a car. But from a developer's perspective, we can kind of build and say, how do I look at these intent? Because you can see right here, I only have 2. And I've actually run a report that's saying, on this particular chatbot, saying, you need some more intents. And one of those is like this. It's like saying, I want to acquire a car, right? And if I do that and I see that intent, what I have here is a confidence to buy a car, I want to acquire a car, and I can then also say, I want to sell a car. I want to purchase a car.
So basically, you're flipping the car now.
Yeah, I'm flipping the car. So what you can see is these different intents. And this is really part of the development experience in terms of how we do this. And then we can train the bot here, and we can say, and we have different ways to train the bot to applying different machine learning and artificial intelligence capabilities. And then I can actually run it, and I can train it. But the goal is here saying, if I want to sell a car, and we'll do this, if I want to buy a car, actually I want to buy a car, we can see the interface. And this is what the developer actually experiences. Because what we're doing overall is that we have the notion of buying and selling cars, and this is what you would see, and we'll see a little bit later when we actually do that, as you can see from the architecture. And here is some objects. So we have built-in objects, and you create custom objects, which you influence there from an overall state management. And then finally, we have here is how do we then do this? How do we take this code and then deploy that code so it can be supported by multiple channels? I think it's really important that we can support both Siri, Alexa, whatever comes up in the future. So we have the capability to then tie into multiple channels. And then in this case, for Facebook, which is what you just saw, it's basically a webhook. And it's a webhook back from Facebook Messenger. And you can see the basic secrets and the security associated with Facebook in this case, and then how we actually integrate that. So now we're going to kind of just sum up this section here. So from a chatbot perspective and a digital assistance perspective, what we're doing is that we've already released kind of the Gen 2, a digital assistant where we're doing multiple things, and we're able to do bot-initiated, and then multiple skill-type bots. And we're moving more to just more proactive digital assistants, actually proactive and headless bots that can be leveraged. So this is an exciting area for engaging your end customer. And that customer could be an employee, could be an end customer. We're deploying in very large volume in terms of this area. So now I'm going to hand it over, and Manish is going to talk about the function part of the demo. And the function part of the demo is how did we do the processing from a serverless perspective. So Manish?
All right, thanks, Matt. That was very good information. So my name is Manish, and good evening, everyone. So I'll be talking about serverless functions and how we use serverless functions in this demo. OK, so let's revisit the architecture that Matt showed earlier. So what we have here is a seller selling his car using a bot. That's the front-end application. So our chatbot is the front-end application. And then in the back end is the blockchain, Oracle blockchain platform, where we record the transaction, right? When the car is sold, the transaction is written into the blockchain network. In the middle, you see a gray or black color boxes. That's the middle tier. That's the magic I'm going to talk about, the magic that happens in the middle box. So once the car number plate is sent to the chatbot, its license plate number is recognized using something called ALPR over in that gray box. And that is sent as an input to the serverless functions. So serverless functions will look up that number plate and do some lookups and things like that. And then once everything goes through fine, they'll record the car transaction into the blockchain network using REST APIs. So before I talk about the demo, how we build this demo and what serverless functions are doing in this demo, what is serverless? Or how many of you are using serverless here today? OK. Quite a few. OK. So serverless is the next level of abstraction where developers don't worry about the underlying infrastructure, servers, compute, storage, any of that stuff, operating systems. What they basically focus on is writing code. As developers, you always want to write code rather than focus on underlying infrastructure, right? So it raises the abstraction level and lets developers focus only on writing code. There are still servers. It doesn't mean there are no servers. There are servers still around, but you focus as a developer on writing the code. So why serverless? There are some very good benefits in using serverless, very sweet benefits. I think the first and most obvious one is when your servers execute, you pay for that execution time. So you don't pay for the idle time of the functions. Unlike previous applications that you have written, the cloud-native applications or microservices, which keep running all the time, serverless functions run only when they're triggered, and they're charged only for the execution time. So there's a lot of cost saving in terms of using serverless architectures. Next, because as a developer, you're only focused on writing code and not worried about the underlying infrastructure or the operating system or the patches of the different operating system patches and things like that, you are much more agile. You are much more, you have got a much more scanned environment. It's much more reliable, right? So it gives you reliability. It gives you higher productivity. It gives you a DevOps atmosphere, DevOps capability, where you just build functions and then they get executed upon a trigger. And in terms of innovation, because you focus only on writing code, so you get to innovate faster. Rather than spending time on doing other activities, which as developers we end up doing, you don't have to do the rest of the stuff. Just focus on writing your code for your serverless functions. So Oracle's serverless functions offering is called Oracle Functions. It is a fully managed, multi-tenant, secure cloud service, which is based on open source FN project. You can check it out at fnproject.io. That's where the source code for our serverless functions resides. Because it is open source, there is no vendor lock-in. You can run the FN project open source serverless platform on your laptop, in your data center, or in our cloud. So it's completely portable. There's no vendor lock-in at all, right? Unlike some other implementations where you get tied to the cloud provider, here it's completely open. Let me go back. Sorry about that. And as I said, the beauty of serverless functions is you pay only for the execution time. You don't pay for the time when the functions are idle, right? So it's a big cost saving for you. So how does it work? How do serverless functions work? Actually, how do Oracle functions work? Well, it is very, very simple, very easy to use for developers. It's very developer-friendly, and that's something we focused on heavily. So what you do is basically, as a developer, you build your serverless function in the language of your choice. If you're a Java programmer, you would build Java functions. If you are a Go programmer, you would use Go. Whatever is the language of your choice, you would build functions. The serverless platform will then convert those functions into a Docker image and push it out to a registry of your choice. It could be a Docker V2 registry which is sitting anywhere, Docker Hub, or your own private registry. And then there are triggers. Whenever a trigger occurs, the function gets executed, and you pay for the execution time of the serverless function. So it's as simple as that. Very easy, very simple to use, very developer-friendly. So what are some of the key features of FN or Oracle functions? Well, it is container native. Dee talked about container native. Dee talked about containers being the primitive or the basic building blocks. Our serverless functions are built using Docker containers, right? And it's built off of open source FN project, like I mentioned earlier. What this means is developers can pretty much write functions in any programming language they want. In fact, you can, if you want to, not that I recommend, you could also use a shell script to write a function and package. If it can be packaged as a Docker container and executed as a function, it will execute. So that gives you a lot more capabilities in terms of, and choices in terms of how you want to write the functions. We give you function developer kits in 5 languages as of today: Java, Python, PHP, Ruby, and Node.js. So these function developer kits are basically helper libraries that help you write functions faster and become more agile in your development, increases your development velocity. And then functions, like I said, execute when there's a trigger. We support all kinds of cloud events as triggers, things like HTTP trigger, a timer trigger, and Kafka events can be a trigger. So we support all those forms of triggers. So any trigger that happens, the serverless function will be executed. So you tie a function to a trigger, and it gets executed. And then, of course, the last point here I want to mention is, since we are open source based, completely open sourced, you could use any of the CNCF open source tools like Prometheus, which Dee talked about, or Zipkin for tracing, or Grafana for logging, for performance monitoring. So you could use any of the open source frameworks for monitoring and managing your function deployments. So what is a function in terms of FN project? Well, it's a simple few lines of code which does one job. It's put in a Docker image. You give it an input via standard input, and the output comes via the standard out. And anything that is written to the standard error gets pushed into the logs. Those logs can be analyzed. So it's pretty straightforward. That's it. You just write a piece of code which accepts input. Logs are written to standard error, and the output is sent to standard out. That's it. Right? Rest of the whole deal, everything else behind the platform is taken care for you by the FN server, the serverless function platform. So let me talk about FN CLI. FN CLI is where most of the developer interaction takes place. Developers will spend most time using this CLI. It's actually, we also have a REST API for our FN project. This CLI is actually a wrapper around the it's the wrapper around the REST API. So all you do is basically, if you want to create a function today, in 10 minutes you can be up and running with a simple function. You do fn init, you specify the runtime. Runtime specifies the language of your choice. In this example, I'm showing Go, and name of my function is my function. Then you choose whether you want to deploy the function locally in your laptop or you want to deploy it in a Docker registry. You specify that. And then you run the fn deploy command and say the app and the app name, right? And that basically builds a Docker image for you of your code and pushes it out and creates a YAML file for you and pushes it out to the Docker registry of your choice. And then to invoke the function, you say fn invoke, and then call your app name and the function name, right? So it's very, very easy. 3 simple commands, fn init, fn deploy, and fn invoke, get you started. All that you need is about 10 or 15 minutes of time to write a simple function, and you're up and running, right? And then if you don't specify triggers, then you can invoke and call it manually. But if you specify triggers, it creates a URL for you, as is shown below. So you could invoke that function using the HTTP URL, which is shown on the slide. So I'll not be doing a demo here, but I'll talk about how we build this demo. So we used fn flow. fn flow is basically, if you look at serverless functions, they do one job and one job typically only. But in vacuum, if you take a function, it doesn't do much. To make the functions useful and meaningful, you need to bring them together, or you need to create a workflow of functions, or you need to chain them together, right? That's where we created something called fn flow. fn flow lets you orchestrate multiple functions and stitch them together into a complex workflow. It can be as complex as you want. To build a microservice or a simple application using a chain of serverless functions. So to build the fn flow, you use Java language today, but we'll be adding support for other languages in future. So unlike some of the other implementations where you have to write difficult JSON code or difficult YAML code, laborious, not difficult, laborious YAML code, if you're a Java programmer, it's very easy to put together your flow functions. So let's get back to our demo. So in our demo, what we have is the chatbot, which Matt showed you. The seller is selling a car using the chatbot application that creates a trigger once the license plate has been recognized. That trigger is sent as an input to the sell car function, and then it can be recorded into the blockchain. But like I said, a sell car function in itself is not typically how you would envision in real life. You need a chain of functions to do multiple things rather than just one job, right? So that's where fn flow comes in. So what we do is from the sell car function, we call Carfax report function, and then we call the criminal lookup function, and that in turn calls multiple other functions. So what you see here is basically a chain of functions which are orchestrated together using fn flow. So this represents the flow function. And we also built an experimental UI, which is very, very cool, which shows the developer friendliness of a platform. So if you have a chain of functions and you want to debug them or figure out what's going on in real time, we created a UI using data that is captured by the fn platform. So can we play this?
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, it's there. So this shows the execution of my chain of functions which I created. And as you can see, the base function fans out other functions, and then they call other functions, and the result of one function is sent as an output to the next function. And then when it is all done, your function executes. And if you select any one function there, and if you want to debug it, if it's running slow, or you want to see what's going on, you can see the entire stack trace there, starting from the original invocation, from where you started the flow. Right? In this case, you can see we started at the Larry's car, which has a number plate 6, LIK274, and then we looked up Carfax history of that car and things like that. So it's very, very developer-friendly. It's very cool. This is one of the features which I love about it. You can debug functions as a developer very easily. You can see how much time it took and when it got triggered and things like that. And I'll end my session by recapping what I said earlier. Oracle Functions is an open source based function as a service offering. It is completely cloud integrated, which means all our PaaS services and all our Kafka events, hub service, and things like that, all of them are integrated together. It runs on top of high-performant Oracle Cloud infrastructure, which is enterprise-grade cloud infrastructure offering from us. It's container native, which is something which is very, very popular among developers. So if you're writing Kubernetes-based microservices and you are a Docker-based developer, your knowledge level gets reused here in terms of when you write serverless functions. You don't have to learn something completely new in order to build functions. It is multi-tenant, and it is secure, and you pay only for what you use. There's no vendor lock-in because it's open source. So you can run your functions anywhere you like. You can start your development on your laptops and run it in Oracle Cloud. So thank you. I'll hand it over to Matt for his section.
Thanks, Manish.
Thanks, Manish.
So let me just say, one of the biggest problems that developers have in the cloud is writing loosely coupled, well-orchestrated, secure types of applications. It's a huge challenge for anybody. You either make them tightly coupled, and then you can bound everything, and it's super secure that way. So through functions, you can actually get the best of both worlds. And so that's one of the things that Manish just walked you through. I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
OK, thanks. So now let's kind of go into the blockchain component and really kind of a permission blockchain kind of notion. So we've going to take the car, we're going to take it over, and then we're going to have.
I don't know why you got Mini on there.
What's that?
Look at the Mini. Come on,
it's
man.
a Mini. So what is blockchain? So I mean, blockchain, as you probably know, is a distributed ledger, and it can maintain distributed ledgers in a peer-to-peer network, and that multiple parties can then participate in that ledger. Bitcoin is obviously the most well-known one. But in the enterprise, what we're seeing are different types of use cases, which actually require a level of communication between parties, and very narrow, potentially very narrow parties. For example, Matt and I might be doing a negotiation on something, and he only is going to see our transactions that we're working, and then Manish joins in, we can add him in. The enterprise has different requirements than what Bitcoin has. But the goal here is to have this distributed ledger for reducing the need for third-party intermediaries so that we can basically build consensus on a particular transaction and then commit that transaction to the blockchain. And we can get really these really near real-time and unalterable records and replicate it among all the participants in the chain.
So Matt, let me just say, so the only way I'm going to trust you in a transaction is through something that's blockchain backed, because otherwise I just don't trust you.
I'm not trustworthy.
I'm not buying a car from you, that's for sure. So Manish, on the other hand, I trust.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Both Matts don't trust each other.
Okay.
Matt not trusting another Matt.
So what are some great use cases? So we're seeing use cases that are kind of broad across a variety of areas. Basically, for example, distributed marketplaces. So for example, I may be buying something in California, and then that marketplace may be being created somewhere else that I may not trust who that person is or that organization that I'm working with. I want to reduce the friction in business transactions and reconciliation. And I want to guarantee actually that a PO has actually been created and that we actually have that PO actually is executed upon. I want to secure, maintain, and share decentralized records. For example, my identity, for example, could be actually augmented with blockchain, for example. And it might be, where did I graduate from college? I can add that, and that becomes part of my identity, and I can maintain and share that overall identity. And then the final one is kind of a key use case in terms of tracking the provenance of documents, products, and materials. Think about supply chain. And so if I'm making Java coffee in Colombia, I want to be able to see that supply chain all the way through the shipping, all the way to different places, and know that that is true Java that's being made in Colombia and then being sold at your local Starbucks. So I want to see that provenance of that material in the supply chain.
And Matt, I was just going to say, so on that last one of the most interesting applications that we're starting to see, there are a number of actually small groups that are starting to look at using blockchain to secure voter records. And it's starting outside this country, but I think we'll start seeing it inside the US as well. It's a very interesting way of looking at, if you read the news and you're reading about a recent a recent voter poll in a foreign country, for example, in South America, and they say they're very deeply concerned with voter fraud. One of the ways that they're starting to do is tie down using blockchain-based technology to be able to track that voter registration all the way through to the vote, while maintaining that security and that safety through the process.
And so for the example that we have tonight, the real issue is that we want to guarantee that that Lexus is a real Lexus, and that Lexus and all the materials and parts associated to that Lexus are all real and validated. And you can apply that to, let's say, to an airplane engine, right? Or to a ledger that's actually, you're looking for some level of reconciliation. You want to guarantee the provenance of that material. So, but there's some real issues with blockchain. One is, really, there's very little plug and play for the enterprise in terms of how do you fit this innovation area into your enterprise? Because you have closed ERPs, you have one-off integrations, it's a complex, overall APIs. Insufficient production readiness. I mean, blockchain from the Hyperledger perspective is just a little over 18 months old. And so we have worked really closely with the Hyperledger Foundation, as well as the Linux.org, to really work on adding sufficient production readiness. And then there's also the other issue associated to continuous platform evolution. It is a rapidly changing platform, and we really want to not have you as it changes be impacted, so that we have compatibility between versions. And then operational challenges. So how do you onboard a member in this permission blockchain? How do you provide monitoring, supportability, and lifecycle management? So from an Oracle blockchain cloud platform perspective, we're really looking at, it's really pre-assembled. It comes, we'll talk about it later, but pre-assembled and built upon the Hyperledger Fabric framework and capability. It's open. It's coming from the open source community. It's a plugin. We can plug and play integrations. So, for example, if you have an ERP and you want to plug in a blockchain as an innovation component, you can do that. You can do that through basically REST APIs or through SDKs. You can plug that directly in, and it's going to be enterprise grade because it's running on top of our OCI infrastructure. And so we are building this so that we can plug it into Oracle, Oracle SaaS or any SaaS actually, and then third-party SaaS, and then even to custom cloud apps and even into on-premise applications. We see a lot of our customers saying, I'm running eBusiness Suite or something, then they want to actually plug that into their existing framework and add capability there. And so this is what we're bringing to the enterprise, and so that organizations and companies can leverage this capability. So let's do a quick demonstration of the blockchain. We're going to transfer
quick.
What's that?
We're going quick.
We're going quick. So we're going to transfer a car to the new dealer. Then we're going to do a quick look at the blockchain interfaces that we have, and then how do you develop for blockchain some chain code. So, okay, first things first. And so we have Bob's car dealership, and so we're going to kind of leverage the chatbot interface again. Here we go. Hi. I'm going to buy that car that was just sold. So this is kind of where the engagement experience starts kind of evolving, and it's offered me up some different cars. But I actually want a Lexus. So I'm going to type in a Lexus and say, here's a Lexus. And so what it's doing now is actually going against the blockchain network and actually looking it up and saying, oh, wait a minute, there's a beautiful Lexus right there. Would I like to buy that? I want some details on that. And there it is, and yes, I'd like to purchase this car. So when I purchase this car, it would transfer it over to the blockchain, and then I'm able to block and buy it. Oh, it's offering me for $400,000. Okay, do you want to confirm? Yeah, I made a little money over this last expansion here in the market. And then we'll come by and we'll look at it. But here's what we're looking at from a blockchain perspective, and looking at the dashboard. And so what you can see is, what we have is basically, we can look at the overall network associated to this. And this is the network that that is deployed for this particular blockchain implementation. We have these different organizations. So we have a home organization called Detroit Auto, and then we have John's dealership and Bob's dealership, these two dealerships which are members, a member organization. They are permissioned into the overall network. And that's actually a good way to think about it, is that it's a network. Right. And so because what we're defining then is basically channels in the network.
And a network that they may not necessarily know about each other within the network.
Right, and that's actually one of the key elements, is saying that the transaction we have Manish will not ever see, but he's all part of the same network. And so we have these channel notions. And so I want to say here, I want to look at this, and I can see these networks. And this is a very simple one, but I can actually build and have these networks communicate with each other and narrow that down. So the next thing I want to do is kind of look from this is the other development experience, because that network, when I commit that transaction, it's actually going through what's called a smart contract. Think of it exactly what it means. It's a contract that we're going to submit this car in for a transaction. Then we have to build consensus. And so with this consensus, I want to take a look at, what was 6LIC274. Oops. See, this is real. 6LIC274. So I'm going to run a query. And so what we see here, this is a custom app that's actually accessing the REST API for the blockchain. It accesses it. And we can see on the right-hand side, we've built this custom app to actually see all the different transactions that have occurred on that particular ledger. And so you can see that a transaction occurred today. And then here, I want to look over here.
Probably zoom.
Oh, I want to zoom? Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, there we go. I can do that. And so what we're seeing in this custom app, because it goes over, because we can add these elements. And this is actually leveraging an open source toolkit from Oracle called Oracle Jet. And so we can build these custom interfaces. And then I can maybe say, maybe I don't want this and it was a mistake. I didn't want to buy that. So I can say Bob's dealership. And I can log in, and I can transfer that back to John's dealership. And I can transfer the vehicle. So this is just interacting with the ledger. And I was to transfer the ledger back, and I sent it back. This may be for some business rules, or maybe Matt doesn't have enough money to buy that Lexus LFA. I think is probably the case. And then finally, what I want to show is, so just to kind of show that we're actually looking at the REST API, right? And I'll zoom in. You can actually see the REST API associated to that. So now let's kind of finish up and go to here.
Bring us home.
What's that?
Bring us home.
I'm bringing us home. I got just a couple minutes, and I can do that. So from an Oracle blockchain service and developers, how do you interact with it? You actually have two areas to build things. One is with developing the smart contracts. You have to build the contracts and how that consensus is going to be built. And really, it's tied back to when you build that Go contract, it has to be a deterministic contract. It's going to be built so that all the consensus can be had amongst the peers. And then we want to build applications on top. And that's what I was just showing you, which is that 6LIC274 was that particular REST application that was built on top of it, accessing the ledger. And what we're providing on the right-hand side are admin console, the proxies, the ledger, and really the kind of the core capability to actually expose that to you and make it simpler for you to use overall. So let's kind of finish up with the Oracle Cloud for application development. So one is, the goal is to improve overall developer productivity and providing full integrated CI/CD tools, expose applications, mobile, web, digital assistants for you to use and to leverage so that you can have tools like a digital assistant, leveraging open source technologies. We can mix and match these different capabilities. And then support polyglot microservices development. So if you want to use Go, you want to use Java, you want to use Node.js, you can use any type of tool that you want. And then also think about API-first development as you start moving to the cloud to make it simpler to you and build these contracts and do a contract-first really kind of development. And so you can build and manage these APIs and secure and manage them. And then automated patches, what we're providing through the platform are these automated patches, upgrades, backups, and recovery. So, and then even looking at container-focused lifecycle management. And finally, predictive monitoring. You have to be able to provide complete operational capability when you're actually doing development. So here's a key thing for you. Here's the takeaway from you. Developer.oracle.com. If you haven't been there, please go there. And thank you very much. I think that's great.
30 seconds to go. You nailed it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Great job. Okay, so just really quickly, we're going to get the last part of this keynote up here in just a second. What I want to say is, I just want you to think back. So this was a really, really simple app, buying and selling something. Yet think about the technology behind that and how far we've come from a capability perspective as devs. So I can harken back to 10 years ago when we were looking at web apps and just selling through a relational backend or something like that. Now think about the kind of capabilities we have and the kind of systems we can build. It's incredible. So without further ado, I would like to invite up on stage Stephen Chin, our developer marketing lead. Stephen, you back there? You coming out? Here he is. Excellent. So, yeah, he doesn't know I'm going to do this yet. How many of you know Stephen? Okay. You all need to know him because he's the guy that has the really cool stuff. Okay?
All right, so we're going to
do it?
Well, I'm going to pull one on you now, Matt.
Oh, no. Okay.
So how about we make Matt play a little game? All right, so I call this game, Are You a Groundbreaker?
Okay.
So everyone who's a developer in the audience, stand up.
No, just everybody stand up. Come on. This is it's a Code 1 keynote. Everybody stand up.
All right, and the way this game works, Matt, is we each have to name a language or technology, and if somebody is using it, they get to sit down.
Okay. Used it within, let's say, the last 3 months. Okay. So am I going first or are you going first?
I'll kick it off.
Okay, why don't you do it?
So one of my personal favorites, any standard SML developers here? Yeah?
If so, you can sit down. Wow, look at that.
Oh, man. All right, okay. That was a swing and miss.
Okay, so let's try, how about R? Anybody using R? We had one guy sit down. Okay. I think we need to do better. Okay. Python. Okay, Python.
All right, we're getting there. That was good.
That's better. Wow, how about Scala? It's actually one of my favorites. Hey, we got some people sitting down. I appreciate that.
Ruby developers? Yeah.
Well, this could take a while, so I'm just going to say Java. Okay, there we go. Doink. Wait, we still got a couple.
Wait, yeah, okay, we got some holdouts here. All right, let me try this. SQL? Oh.
We got one.
All right.
Fortran!
So I think I figured it out, Matt.
Okay.
These guys, they're the blockchain developers. They're the cool guys in the audience. So give the blockchain guys a round of applause. And you feel free to tweet out to Groundbreakers what you guys are doing.
That's right.
Now, one of the cool things we did this weekend was we actually did a great kids event, Oracle Code for Kids. And just to kick things off, because we have some great folks to bring out, I wanted to show you guys a little bit what we did this last weekend with some of you community members.
I feel like it's really interesting because there's a level of creativity involved.
Go back. We probably shouldn't have done it.
Okay. Every student really does have a capacity to pursue whatever they want to pursue. I really want them to be able to dream big and to believe that they really can go out and change the world.
It's a robot that plays soccer.
So we're at Oracle Code for Kids, and this is a good way for us to show technology to the next generation of developers.
The slow race begins.
the hope is that they walk away and they think, I can do this, and I successfully made something. It wasn't as scary as I thought it would be.
90 degrees? Wait, it's going by itself.
I've programmed robots and stuff, but I've never drawn with them before.
I'm done.
We're really encouraging students to understand that math and science are something that are beautiful and functional for anyone, and that it's not about the test, it's not about the classroom.
It's flickering.
It's about understanding the world around you and how you can make things happen.
Squishy Circuits is a great workshop. The kids get Play-Doh, and the Play-Doh conducts electricity.
And along the way teaching them, design and the process of trial and error and how electronics work.
Alice is a great tool for teaching early computer science. Here we did the basics of building a 3D world, the basics of programming, a quick storyboard, and then they created a short film.
No, we need like...
The Lego Mindstorms workshop, the kids are going to build a little elevator. They're going to program it using Java as the programming language.
It's exciting to see the number of girls here and to see this very diverse group of students who are all out there tackling science together and technology together. It means that in the future, the world of STEM, the world of technology is going to be much more diverse because so many more students are being exposed to it.
So I think this is a great opportunity for us to teach the next generation of programmers. It was great to have all those different students with us. A lot of them came from different schools from around the Bay Area. A lot of underprivileged students we were able to bring forward, so that was really awesome. Now, I'm pleased to announce the new Oracle Groundbreaker Awards. And this is a way of us giving back to the development community. So we want to both recognize folks in the development community who are doing great things, and also give you guys as community members a chance to nominate and vote on some of the folks. So we're going to be opening a website where you guys can nominate and vote on the coming Groundbreaker Awards. And we have an initial set of folks who we think you'll really like to receive this and kick off this at Oracle Code 1. So the first person who I want to invite on stage, oh, here's our award winner recipients, is somebody who is the co-creator of Kafka. And also, she's very special, so she enjoys diving with the sharks. I'm pleased to invite Neha Narkade. Yeah, thank you. So please, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words.
Okay, well, I'm so humbled to be here receiving this award with so many industry luminaries. It's also a surreal moment because I started my career at Oracle as a software engineer only less than 10 years ago, precisely 9 years ago. If back then someone told me that you're going to be up on the keynote stage receiving an award, I thought you'd be joking. So this is really a happy moment for me. Thank you so much. I'm excited and looking forward to this.
Yeah, Nehe. Nehe. So we will mail you one.
Yes,
Thank you.
We're sharing. We're sharing.
So they're laughing with us, I think. All right, so the next person I'd like to invite out on stage is the creator of the Python language, but I think he's very unique. He's probably the only former benevolent dictator for life in the audience. Right? Yeah, OK. Nobody stood up this time. All right. So I would like to invite out Guido van Rossum. Okay. And please say a few words.
Wow. Thank you. I did not expect that it was so pretty. Yeah, if a year ago someone had told me that today I would be on stage at an Oracle conference, I would not have believed it. But seriously, I think this award goes to the entire Python community, all the users, all the developers, because I certainly could not have done all that by myself. So thank you very much. Please.
So the next person we'd like to recognize is the co-creator of Hadoop, and also somebody who loves, doing a lot of outdoors activities like mountain biking, but I think he's probably the tallest one in this room. You guys can challenge him later if you'd like to. Doug Cutting?
Thank you.
Please say a few words.
I'm honored to accept this, but I accept it, as with Guido, on behalf of the greater community of people. My role was actually pretty small when you think about it. Primarily involved in coming up with a good name for Hadoop and writing a little bit of code, but it takes a whole lot more than that to make a big, successful open source project. And I'm indebted to all the people who've helped me. So thanks to them.
Thank you very much. All right, so the next person I'd like to invite out is the creator of Grails, and also somebody who I think has the coolest office of all of us. He's been remote working from Spain for the past 9 years. So Graham Roche. Hey, Graham.
Thank you.
Please say a few words.
Thanks so much. Well, this is a surprise and an honor to be amongst these amazing people receiving this award. It's incredible to be here. In terms of my story, I have to once again emphasize that the amazing Ruby on Grails community has allowed me the privilege to be able to work as a professional open source developer for the last 10 years. And it's been a remarkable experience. I've found myself lucky to be able to get up every morning and innovate on new technology, work on innovative solutions every day, give back to the community. And it's really down to them that I'm able to work on new innovative products like Micronaut, which was released in 1.0 form today. So thanks to all the Ruby on Grails community for allowing me to do what I do.
Yeah, thank you. OK, and the last person I'd like to invite out is the co-creator of JRuby. And personally, he has me beat on this, but I'm pretty sure he has a higher score on Untapped than you do. You should know this if you drank with Charlie. So, Charles Nutter.
All right. Well, I mean, as with my friends, I have to thank the Ruby community, Yukihiro Matsumoto for creating such an amazing language, the JRuby community for supporting us. Tom Enabo is out there somewhere. He's the other half of the team, and he's the man behind the scenes that actually gets work done. I just come to things like this and show off.
And your competition on Untapped.
And my competition on Untapped, yeah. We go back and forth. But definitely want to thank the community, and I'm just thrilled to be here, glad that we can continue to make the JVM a good platform for multiple languages. Hope we can keep doing this for many years to come. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, so you guys can play along with us. We're going to do a short fireside chat with all of our award winners today. And you can ask questions by tweeting. Just mention @Groundbreakers. And we're going to moderate the questions in the background. So feel free to tweet out specific things you want to ask the panel, ask individuals. To kick things off, we'll just kind of chat about some stuff and then go back and forth. And then as good questions come in, we'll pick them up. So just as a starting topic, I think one of the things which we all have in common is working a lot with open source projects, open source communities. And I can guarantee you there's a lot of open source contributors out here in the audience, but what advice would you give folks in contributing and being part of open source projects in a productive way?
Grow a thick skin. That's probably the first thing. There's a lot of jerks out there, and they mean well. They're passionate about the work they do, but you kind of got to be expecting that when you go into open source development.
Sounds like there's a story here, Charlie.
There's so many stories, but anybody who's dealt with open source communities knows that they can be a little caustic at times. And like I say, people are passionate about what they do. They want things to go well.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to roll with the punches if you're going to get involved. But it's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth the effort.
I'd also say start small. I mean, you don't know how valuable it is, a small fix to the documentation or a tiny PR or a little improvement.
Yeah, wiki edits, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you do little things here and there, and soon your contributions turn into huge contributions. It doesn't have to be a massive PR with them.
Yeah, so maybe like bug fixes, little patches.
Add tests.
Yeah.
Test cases.
Tests for missing cases, yeah, absolutely.
Do something that's meaningful to you. I mean, you want to scratch your own itch. I think is the best way to make sure that what you're doing actually matters to someone, and it should matter to you. So you want to fix the documentation when you found it confusing, and you want to fix the bugs that you've encountered. But I also want to build on what Charles was saying about the thick skin. I think the overwhelming thing, is maybe another side of that, which is to be polite and welcoming, to welcome people who are new to the community, because that's the lifeblood. That's what keeps an open source project alive, are new people coming along and joining the project and helping it to grow. And the more you can welcome people, the better, and more people you'll have helping.
I completely agree with you, Doug. I mean, the open source is really about the community. And what we could do as some of the influencers in the community is also just create an environment where people can contribute, create an environment where we could opt more committers in to encourage new contributors so they don't get stuck on patches. But really, I think one of the things I really believe in is invest in evangelism, right? Like, invest in getting the word out, whether it is through documentation, blog posts, talks, just grow the community, invite more people in. That's something I found useful. Excuse me.
Cool. And so what sort of things help open source projects, and which things are kind of challenging? Maybe contributions which are hard to take back into projects. If you could give advice to folks maybe who are working in corporate settings, how they can best contribute back in a productive way.
Well, one of the things I like is when people sort of come with an idea and they're open to feedback on their idea. Whether it's a patch and they say, here is something that you might like, but maybe I'm not getting everything, give me feedback on this patch. The worst kind of contributions is honestly the 6,000-line patch that comes with no explanation on why this is doing anything that it's doing. Or almost worse is a 10-line patch hidden inside a 500-line refactoring div.
Yeah. Don't make a lot of white space changes. Focus on what you're really changing. I can agree with that one.
Agree with that. You also asked about what holds open source projects back. I'd be curious to get the panel's view on it, but I think that one of the things that holds open source projects back, the successful ones, is real-world adoption. Just finding those early companies that could use it at scale and really report bug fixes back, carve out the strategy going forward. I've seen the most successful projects really get that adoption that could improve the quality of the project and the community, ultimately.
Are there any examples of ways you can create a more vibrant community or get folks more engaged from your individual projects?
I think that making it easy to contribute, there's a few little steps that you can take. GitHub has a nice contributing.md file that you can create, which providing guidance on how to get started. Whether it be changing the documentation, how to build the documentation, or how to submit a patch, or projects that provide no guidance are more difficult to contribute to. And automating as much processing as possible in terms of if your project has a contributor license agreement, don't put barriers in terms of how users can sign that and so forth. There's automation tasks that you can help with.
making it easy for somebody who approaches a project to get to actually make a contribution that will be accepted. So that's making what the expectations are clear by documenting them, making the steps minimal, and then on the other side, if you're going to contribute, you want to actually read the documentation that's there about what's expected of a contributor and understand the process and think a little bit about the person on the other side of it that's going to have to live with whatever change you make for decades in the case of some of us and cares deeply about this.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest non-coding ways that folks have helped JRuby and other projects I know is just being involved in whatever the chat service is that you have, or the mailing list, or forums. Anybody with any sort of experience that's ever used Ruby or JRuby can come in and start answering questions. And having someone that's essentially 24 hours a day, you can man your chats, you can man your forums. That's a great way for folks all around the world to make a small contribution to any community, just to make sure that there's somebody there to say, answer simple questions or direct people to resources. So that'd be a very easy way for someone to get involved. Just hang out and be there.
Cool. So I think we all know now 5 cool open source projects where you can contribute to. So you have these guys. But there's a whole bigger breadth of projects that you can contribute to. And I think we'll come back to open source as a topic. But I just wanted to touch on, I think all of you guys are very busy individuals who balance out heavy work schedules with a lot of content which you contribute personally to projects. So how do you manage that heavy workload of both being active for work, but also having a little bit of life balance?
I've thought a lot about this question, and then later on concluded that it's really not about work-life balance at all for me. Now it's about work-life synergy. On one day, it is worth spending those 12 hours, 16 hours on something you're really passionate about. And on another day, it is worth leaving early for your kids' games or for working out. That's just something I've found a lot of comfort in now.
I think that being present when you're not at work is pretty critical. I think that it's very easy to take your work home with you and be connected to social media or Twitter or email and be distracted when you are at home or are spending time. And I think you need a certain amount of discipline to keep that separation for sure.
I think as a student, I had terrible study habits, and I would, pull all-nighters and cram for finals, and I was miserable, and I didn't do that well, and I didn't get what I could have out of classes, and I think somehow what I did learn was that didn't work. And as a professional, I've always really tried to limit the number of hours I spend working a day. I've never worked into the evening, because I find then I can't sleep, and I can't sleep, then I'm just trashed the next day. And so stopping and doing something else makes me more effective. And if I have a certain number of fixed hours, then I really have to focus. I have to do triage and say, what can I afford to get done today? And it makes me work more intelligently. And I think I'm more productive and more effective when I don't work too much. I think they go hand in hand.
What are some examples of things you like to do outside of work, specifically?
I go on bike rides a lot. I hang out with my family. I go to movies. I read books. I'm typically always reading a novel or a nonfiction book, and I spend at least an hour or two a day.
That's not on a screen.
What's that?
Not on a device.
No. I read on a Kindle. Does that count?
E-ink screen.
Yeah, I think this is especially difficult for open source projects because we've got users all around the world. They're working at all hours of day.
Yeah.
I essentially got into JRuby because I took my weeks of vacation from my regular job to work on JRuby. I spent days and weekends and nights trying to make this thing go before we ever got hired for it. So suddenly my weekends and nighttime project became my days and weekends and nighttime project, and it was just all-consuming. And at some point you have to take a step back and isolate yourself from tech in general and find a way to disconnect from it at least for a few hours a day. But with open source, it's really tempting to work and work and work and keep working on this all night. Somebody files a bug, and I'm about to go to sleep. This is a personal affront to me. I have to fix this thing before I sleep, or I'm going to be spinning this around in my head all night. That you have to kind of get past. You have to figure out a way to move on and remember that there's another day and that you can work on it later on.
Yeah, I've got that challenge a lot. One of the things I actually had to do was reduce my job. I'm just taking 1 day a week off completely. And I just have a little mini vacation in the middle of the week with my wife, weekly, just to sort of replenish my batteries.
Yeah. Burnout is a real risk if you don't find some way to get past this stuff. And I know a lot of open source developers that, I know several open source developers who are no longer open source developers because the intensity of trying to support this 24-hour community and all of these needs and all of these people who maybe don't understand how much work goes into the projects, it killed them off. They don't do open source work anymore. Just couldn't keep up with it. So you have to keep the balance if you want to be able to maintain.
And if somebody expects you to and demands that you work every night and every weekend, that's not who you want to be working for, frankly.
Yeah.
Life's too short for that, I think. And there's plenty of technology jobs out there. That's just not reasonable. And I think you're not effective when you do that.
Absolutely not.
Generally, I think people are fooling themselves. They think they need to do that, and they think they're more effective, and they're scared of not working, or I think there's other psychological things going on. But anyway.
Yeah, and in some sense, when you do that, right, you're also kind of not cultivating some backup, right? You're not cultivating the next person who could do your job. I found like just being lazy and just waiting a while has been helpful, in contributing and new committers, bringing them up.
Yeah, you have to learn how to let go. I mean, it's very tempting for us to take everything that comes into an open source project on ourselves because I can fix all of this stuff, but I could also ask someone else to help me out and work on something, or get other people involved in the project. It's not a project if it's just me.
I bet you don't even have to ask people to help you. They'll gladly help if you just back off from the keyboard for a few hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I try, my goal is always with some particular topic, one interaction per day. Do all my homework, study the issue, say there's some debate about how to do something, think about it, write something up, and then don't respond to any of the comments till the next day. You have a chance to sleep on it, and you can easily escalate, where you see these flame wars and these discussions that just go on, waste everybody's time who's reading it. You've got 100 people reading a thing with 1,000 messages in it. Think of the amount of time wasted. And if each of those people could just say, I'm going to take my time and only weigh in once a day, you actually get a much better discussion.
Right.
Okay, and we chatted on this a little bit, so a bunch of you guys have very interesting interests outside of your day jobs. So, I think you like to go out and do quite a lot of outdoor stuff, Doug. You were mentioning that scuba diving is a particular interest, Neha. But what do you guys do to stay healthy? Like, what sort of things do you do to kind of keep yourselves going?
What I've found is just 10 or 20 minutes of a run, like an outdoor run, has helped me, stay calm. Just find a couple moments to take a step back and think about my day and just be much more productive. But I've noticed that just reducing the commitment that I make to myself on exercise or meditation or whatever that might be, that has helped me a lot. It's just like lowering the bar a little bit and saying, well, it could just be 10 minutes. And that has helped quite a bit, like to stay on schedule.
I think working from home on open source, there's a danger that you end up, never leaving the walls of your house, essentially. And but I find that regular exercise is critical, whether it's going for a walk, spinning, or some kind of activity. Personally, I enjoy regular walks, and then when I have a bit more time, things like skiing, things like paddleboard, enjoying the outdoors, breathing fresh air, because it's real danger getting closed inside of one room. otherwise.
We got a dog recently, and so now you have to walk the dog a couple times a day, regardless of the weather. You need to, or else she's going to be up all night. And it's great discipline. I mean, if it's raining, you put on rain gear, and you get out and you walk the dog. And I actually think that getting out and exercising, and sleep for that matter, getting plenty of sleep, are actually related to work. I do a lot of my best thinking when I'm not at the keyboard. When I'm out walking around, I start thinking about the work things. In the middle of the night, I have great ideas. They're not always great in the morning, but they seem pretty great in the night.
I try not to think about work in the middle of the night, because then I just don't sleep at all. But sort of my favorite way of sort of getting in that sort of sideways zone. I mean, I'm Dutch. I grew up riding a bicycle. Riding a bike outdoors, watching some birds on the side, that's just my favorite activity. And yeah, that sort of the creative thoughts will start flowing when I do that.
Nice.
But yeah, I can totally relate to what you're saying. Sometimes stepping away from the problem, you get so close to a problem that you end up, if you just sit there at the keyboard going round and round in circles and never resolving it, and then you step away and think about it or sleep on it, and a solution comes to you.
Couldn't agree more.
I don't know if this can really be a recommendation, but kids definitely keep you out of the house and keep you busy too. So if you need something else to do, you can have a kid.
Yeah.
That will keep you busy. Well, and that will pull you away, no problem at all.
Yeah. They also help with that triage. What is really important? What do I really need to be focusing on? Is arguing with this guy who's wrong on the internet really going to help me along?
Yeah,
no, it's not. You step away from that with those much more rapidly when you've got
something more rewarding. You can turn your attention.
Yeah, I think people closest to you give you perspective. As I look back on my career, I think early on it kind of feels like you must succeed at this task, or you must succeed at this project or something. And over time you realize that work kind of gives you satisfaction and happiness, but not true joy. I think true joy lies in just like spending time with loved ones, whether they're kids, your significant others, pets. That's just helped me over the long run.
Okay, so I think we've learned the secret here to being a great coder: kids and dogs. So one other area which I think is a lot of interest to the folks in this panel is diversity in the workforce for especially computer science and technical professionals. And I think this also relates to our earlier discussion, like open source. So how do you guys see ways of improving diversity in our approach to how we raise kids and how we also approach communities?
Well, I'm certainly raising my son, who is now 16, to be very compassionate and be aware of the issues around diversity. I was raised a feminist, and I'm raising him as a feminist, and it's working out great. For a community, I also recommend sort of becoming conscious of the importance of diversity and taking positive action. Be aware of unconscious bias that may exist if your current developer community or user community is mostly white and male, like it almost always seems to be. Do something about it. I mean, in the Python community, we very specifically reached out to women to ask them to speak at Python conferences, and we sort of subsidized them if they needed that. But the reaching out, asking, come speak at our conference, made a huge difference in how our whole user community feels. For the core development community, we're behind on that trend, but I would say that introducing mentorship and establishing a code of conduct, not just for events like this, but actually for mailing lists and for the sort of the online community, and enforcing it, is important. It's not always fun to do the enforcement part, but it's definitely worth it to show that you're serious about welcoming people other than white males in your group.
So just to respond to one of the questions coming from our Twitter stream. So Kevin Nilsson, who's one of the Jug leaders in the Bay Area, asked us any advice for young developers like Andy Nilsson. So what would you tell Andy as a young developer about the best way which he can kind of improve diversity?
You know, to me, as sort of a member of the minority group, if I look back on how I started with the open source community, for me it was really about having a role model, right? Someone to encourage me to, submit that patch, or someone to encourage me or to hear me out and say like, oh yeah, this contribution made sense for this reason. It was Camille, who was one of the new committers on the Zookeeper community. I think that signal from the community about electing Camille was kind of a big deal for me. Like that was in itself an encouragement that yes, I could do this, even though this particular community is largely male or is largely white, or it could be anything, right? So I think that stuck with me. You mentioned earlier about unconscious bias, just being aware that men are generally evaluated more on potential and women are evaluated more on experience. Just knowing that when you're electing committers, when you're reading that message on the community mailing list, I think that will go a long way. I truly just believe that communities that have role models are more likely to have more diversity in the community, just because of that implicit acceptance that works in a big way.
It's interesting because there's a lot of things that we can do at a conference or project level to try and make conferences and projects more welcoming, but so much is going to start with young developers like Andy that need to start thinking about this now. If they see folks in their community, in whatever area they go into, that are being marginalized, they need to start saying something about that. I've heard even recently, within the past 5-10 years, I've heard folks from a previous generation say things like, girls don't have a head for math. Like things like this are still, these ideas are still out there. And it's folks like Andy and folks here that can start making a change there and say that these old, outdated ideas are not true anymore. They've never been true. And we need to do a better job of welcoming all sorts of minorities, all sorts of folks that have been marginalized in technical communities and whatnot into this space. It has to start at that level. It's very difficult for us. We're doing what we can now with conferences and trying to draw in more people into our communities. But if you didn't go to school for it and you've not been doing it, well, there's only so many people out there that we can bring into our communities. We need to start as young as possible and get folks involved.
Yeah, community initiatives are definitely important. I think the more of them, the better. In the Groovy and Grails community, we're really lucky to have the great ladies who have a user group of specifically for the female Groovy Grails developers, and they have done a fantastic job in evangelizing Groovy and Grails to the community and really promoting those technologies and inclusiveness and so forth.
Right.
So more and more initiatives like that, like the Great Ladies, amongst all open source communities, I think would really benefit open source as a whole.
Right. Probably similar to, there's a group in the Ruby community called Rails Girls,
yeah,
where essentially what they will do is bring people in who are not even technical.
Yes.
And spend a day with them, and by the end of the day, they'll have an application up and running. And I've heard so many success stories that have come out of that. Women that were in jobs they were not happy with that came to one of these events, they're now doing Rails development, and they're so much happier with the work they're doing.
Same
so
with
more and more
Django
of these
Girls.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we could probably chat about this for hours, but I think probably a good takeaway for our audience on something they can do is just finding a way to mentor. Mentor some women in an open source project, mentor some kids who are up and coming programmers. Try to take your opportunity and your skills as a developer to further the community. So I'm going to ask one last question to kind of close out the panel. I think this is a good one by Rafael Urdanada. And he's wondering which open source project inspired you. And we'll quickly go through the panel. Just think about it, like if there's a particular open source project, maybe an individual in your life, someone who inspired you to do some of the great work which we're recognizing you for today. So you want to start? Neha?
Yeah, well, back when I joined LinkedIn, one of the main reasons I joined the company was because they had a whole web page listing out all the open source projects that the company invested in. And Project Voldemort that my co-founder created, that was on that list. And that was just, it didn't take off as much as Kafka did, but it was inspiring back then. And that's how I made the decision of joining LinkedIn and working with Jay. And then later on, we ended up creating Kafka that ended up becoming so successful. So I remember that just having that page and having that focus on open source from a company like LinkedIn was basically the first reason why I joined that company, amongst many others.
Awesome.
Nice.
So is this about what inspired me to sort of start with Python 28 years ago? There was no open source. Well, there were a few GNU things. I think the thing I was most impressed with was actually, believe it or not, something called X11. It's no longer really around, or maybe it's a little bit, but at the time, that was a very large, successful open source project.
Cool.
And I blatantly copied the license.
I remember reading source code as an undergraduate, which you can't do unless it's open source. We didn't. Again, it wasn't called open source when I was doing this. This is the early '80s. I remember reading two different versions of Emacs. There was Gosling's Emacs, which Gosling, one of the fathers of Java, had written a version of Emacs. The story of that is an amazing one. But and then Stallman's GNU Emacs, Stallman's second version of Emacs, was also fascinating to read. They were these large, well-written programs by amazing developers, which were fun for me to read and try to figure out how they did what they did as an Emacs user.
Well, it's an interesting question, actually. The first open source project I was actually exposed to was an Apache project called Cocoon, and I happened to know one of the contributors, and he taught me a lot about contributing in the Apache way and so forth. Subsequently, I got inspired greatly by Groovy, obviously. Certainly the Apache model and so forth really inspired me in the early days to contributing to open source, and everything being out in the open and being able to browse source code was, I learned a lot just, as you said, browsing source code and looking at open code.
Cool. And I'm pretty sure I know what your inspiration is, Charlie.
I have so many things that have inspired. I do have to tell the first open source project story, though, because I was a Windows user in the mid to late 90s, and for a while I was running this project called Lightstep. Anybody out there use Lightstep? Desktop replacement? There's always at least one. There's a couple. Sweet.
I did.
Hey, see? So about 1996, 1997, I was using Lightstep as well, and it was an open source C-based desktop for Windows, and I wanted to make an improvement to it. So I started trying to improve it, and the code was so rough. I don't want to say things too negative, but it was messy, and there was a lot of problems with it. So I just went and cleaned up a bunch of code and submitted it back. About a week later, I was the lead developer of Lightstep. So this is my first lesson of how deep you can go all of a sudden when you start contributing to open source. You can be the lead of a project the next day if you find the right thing to fix. So that inspired me, that you can get involved and really get involved all of a sudden in a project. But going on from there, one of the big things that inspired me to do what I'm doing today, obviously, is the Ruby language. I've been really excited about the language itself. I went to see it at a conference without knowing the language at all, and I could understand everything. And that was the day that I really decided I want to try and bring more languages like Ruby to the JVM.
All right, so I want to thank all of our panelists for being an inspiration to the entire developer community. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. Here. All right, a big round of applause.
Thanks, everyone, for staying until the end.
We're not, what do you say? Sorry. We're not done thanking folks yet, because we have someone I'd like to invite back up stage. So, Matt Thompson, thank you for joining me back on stage again.
Of course. That was interesting, actually.
Yeah,
that was cool.
This is fun. These guys are great. And so, you know, we have great people we're recognizing today, but we also have some great folks who make this conference great. We have an annual tradition of recognizing the Java 1 rock stars. Can you guys please come up on stage? And join me stage left.
You guys know who you are. You're up here. Let's go.
So we have an annual tradition of recognizing the Java 1 rock stars. And today we're announcing a new program named for this, the Code 1 Stars. All of the session votes which you give as you're completing sessions are what make these folks get this wonderful recognition. They're the best speakers at the conference. They're excellent individuals. They're all contributing to open source, talking about emerging technologies, leading the community.